Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Kunjumoideen and Dr. Venu, for allowing me to organize this function on PCOS. And I'll be not wasting much of time. I first introduce our first session, and the chairpersons for the first session were Dr. Annie Udupan Madam. She's a Director and Chief Gynecologist in Vettukatil Women's and Children's Hospital from Muvattupuzha. She's a Senior Consultant. And Dr. Sibimol Aji, Consultant Gynecologist at General Hospital, Muvattupuzha. And I invite both madams to take up the initiative. And the first speaker is Dr. Elizabeth Jacob. Over to madam.
Thank you, Dr. Raju. Today's our subject is PCOS in midlife. This is a common problem seen by all of the obstetricians almost on every day in the OPD and discussed almost in every CMS. Still, we are with so many queries. Today, we have an eminent person to talk on this subject, and that is none other than Dr. Elizabeth Jacob, HOD and Senior Consultant of the Apollo Adlex Hospital, Kochi. Most of us have listened to her talk, and she is one of the eminent speakers. And when we go into her details, we know that she is the recipient of so many awards, FIGO Award, Kalyani Devi Memorial Award. Other than that, she has so many international publications in the Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology. She has also presented so many papers at the state, national, and international conferences. Above all, she was the topper and medalist in DME, OB, and Gynae. I am very happy to invite Dr. Elizabeth to take over the subject.
Dr. Elizabeth, you can share your screen and proceed.
Dr. Elizabeth is muted.
Unmute yourself.
Please unmute.
A very, very warm good evening to one and all. At the outset, I would like to thank the KFOG Reproductive Medicine Committee for especially Dr. Fesi, Dr. Kunjumoideen, and Dr. Raju Nair for making me part of the CME. And a big thanks to Annie ma'am and Dr. Sibimol for those kind words of introduction. Actually, when I was asked to talk on PCOS in midlife, the look on my face was like this little boy here, because PCOS has been traditionally considered to be a disease of the adolescents and the reproductive age group. And there were so many queries in my mind, and that made me take a ride through the literature. And actually, I came up with a lot of answers, but many more number of questions. And in today's next 15 to 20 minutes, I would like to take you through what literature tells us about PCOS in midlife. What we know is a drop, and what we don't know is an ocean, was the wise words from Sir Isaac Newton, and it cannot be much more truer as far as PCOS in midlife is concerned. We are all aware that PCOS is not merely a reproductive disorder, but an endocrinological disorder. Although hyperandrogenism and infertility that PCOS causes are distressing to young women, its metabolic sequelae eventually plague the individual in terms of morbidity and mortality through midlife and on, and that's what we'll be discussing today. PCOS actually spans the lives of women, affecting them from in utero till death, and it's imperative not only to recognize it, but also delay or arrest its metabolic sequelae. This pictorial depiction actually makes us go through what exactly is the pathophysiology of PCOS. And as we all know, it's a combination of the genetic predisposition along with environmental factors, which ultimately results in what we know today as the fetal developmental programming disorder, resulting in a FGR-SDA baby and maternal hyperandrogenism, both contributing to oxidative stress, pro-inflammatory factors, finally leading on to what is the flash word now, epigenetic modifications, leading on to compensatory growth, which result in both metabolic alteration in the insulin pathway and the lipid pathway. The metabolic alterations in the insulin pathway results in glucose intolerance, insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia, and ovarian hyperandrogenism. And the lipid metabolism alterations result in dyslipidemia, visceral obesity, and altered hyperandrogenism, finally leading on to the features of PCOS. The PCOS manifestations are well known, but it is the insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, and psychological problems that we will be encountering in PCOS women in the midlife. The PCOS diagnostic criteria has undergone so many workshops, so many multiple working groups working along with it. But even now, the Rotterdam criteria of 2003 stands. And as we discuss the diagnosis of PCOS in midlife, we will see what it actually means. When I actually wanted to summarize what PCOS in midlife means to a woman's life, this picture beautifully depicts what a PCOS woman goes through from in utero till menopause. The initial phases are all well known and will be discussed by eminent speakers later on in the session. What I will be concentrating on is this young midlife woman, I would say, who will be presenting to us with a plethora of metabolic disorders, starting from type 2 diabetes, dyslipidemia, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, and endometrial malignancy. But the complexity of PCOS lies in the different phenotypes that we know of, and finally, the great metabolic complexity that each phenotype presents to us with. Though classically we talk about the 4 phenotypes, more than 16 phenotypes have been detected. And finally, in menopause, the manifestations are umpteenly different in the different phenotypes to a great extent. And hence, larger studies and detailed studies will only shed light on each phenotype presenting as which predominant metabolic syndrome in her midlife. The diagnosis of PCOS in midlife can be difficult since the clinical and biochemical manifestations change with age. But the history would be our main marker as far as PCOS in midlife is concerned. So if we have a well-documented long history of hyperandrogenism or a well-documented long history of infrequent periods of oligomenorrhea, this woman in her midlife can be considered to be a lady with PCOS. What about the aging effects on the reproductive endocrinology? That's what PCOS women in midlife will present to us with. There are very few interesting observations that were noted, which include there is a reduction in the androgen production as she ages, but it is not as much as it is pronounced in the non-PCOS women. But there's an interesting fact that these classical PCOS phenotype women is tempered down from her irregular periods. She goes on to having more regular periods after 40 years and definitely a longer reproductive lifespan. The attenuation in the decrease in AMH has been noticed and the ovarian volume with a normal postponement of her menses, that is her menopause age would be postponed by 2 years. There is a little increased chance of her becoming pregnant in midlife, and I'm sure many of these fertility specialists sitting here will vouch for that. The lasting facial and body hair and hair loss and balding due to the prolonged exposure to hyperandrogenic factors will extend into the early menopause. But the silver lining for them would be that there will be fewer climacteric symptoms and fewer hot flushes in PCOS women as they enter into midlife. But the detrimental effect on the self-esteem and body image due to the loss of height and an increase in BMI associated with it have interesting psychological implications. While in menopause, it would not be possible to diagnose because of the cessation of menses. And interestingly, it has been found that PCOS features on ultrasound during menopause include inclusion cyst and vascular structures rather than follicles. And the pathology studies on the ovaries have not demonstrated the presence of any secondary follicles. So the clinical manifestations in midlife would concentrate on mainly a delay in the menopause, metabolic syndromes, risk of CVD, type 2 diabetes, and obstructive sleep apnea. During midlife, we might have to look beyond the picture and into the picture and look at the grave consequence that may be lurking behind the trees, like the metabolic disorders may take preference over the gynecological disorders. So how do we go about minimizing the long-term consequences of PCOS? That's exactly what we as clinicians should be aiming at. A lot of evidence have come up regarding the advices or recommendations, but still there are a lot of unanswered questions. There is definitive indication that there is a long-term risk of type 2 diabetes and endometrial malignancy. There is definitely a possible association to metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease risk, and obstructive sleep apnea, but the role of its effect on ovarian and breast cancer is still highly controversial. So now coming on to type 2 diabetes, for which there is a definitive 5-fold increase in the Asian population, with about 30 to 40% developing impaired glucose tolerance and 10% developing type 2 diabetes. And it has been found that the phenotype with hyperandrogenism and insulin resistance carry the maximum metabolic risk as far as developing type 2 diabetes is concerned. And the International Diabetes Federation also identified PCOS as a significant risk factor for the development of type 2 diabetes. And we need to note an important factor that this increased prevalence of impaired glucose tolerance and type 2 diabetes is independent of BMI. So that just makes it clear that even the lean PCOS are at high risk of developing type 2 diabetes later on, and hence has to be aggressively screened. So how do we minimize this risk of type 2 diabetes? By glycemic status assessment at baseline every 1 to 3 years later on. OGTT, FBS, and HbA1c have all been recommended, but in the high-risk group, that is BMI of more than 25, in the Asian population more than 23, with a history of abnormal glucose intolerance in the family, hypertension, or high-risk ethnicity, OGTT is recommended over HbA1c and a fasting blood sugar. What about metabolic syndrome? Despite considerable overlap between PCOS and metabolic syndrome, they are not identical or interchangeable, and definitely there is a 2-fold increase in the risk of metabolic syndrome in women with PCOS. So all those PCOS women should definitely be offered monitoring of weight changes and BMI and the blood pressure, and this monitoring should be done at each visit, preferably 6 to 12 monthly. The BMI categories and the waist circumference should be guided by the WHO guidelines, and the overweight obese women should have a fasting lipid profile done and the risk assessment done based on the CVD global risk. So what about the cardiovascular disease risk? Here there have been a lot of controversies between studies, and there have been the actual effect of cerebrovascular disease in PCOS women still remains unclear pending high quality studies. But definitely the prevalence of the risk factors is increased, and it warrants the consideration of screening for CVD risk factors in these women with PCOS. The recommendations as far as the exact age at which the first screening should be done and how frequently the screening should be performed is yet to be determined. But all women with PCOS should have the lipid profile checked frequently and the global CVD risk assessed. If screening reveals CVD risk, that's such as cigarette smoking, dyslipidemia, hypertension, IGT, and lack of activity, these women definitely should be screened for the increased risk of CVD. Endometrial cancer, we are all aware that there is an increased risk of 2 to 6-fold in PCOS women to develop endometrial cancer, though the absolute risk of endometrial cancer remains low, and hence we should have a very low threshold as far as PCOS women is concerned whenever they present to us with abnormal AUB in the perimenopausal age group. We require a low threshold, and investigation by a transvaginal ultrasound and an endometrial biopsy is recommended if there is a thickened endometrium or additional risk factors such as prolonged amenorrhea, abnormal AUB, and excess weight gain is detected. But the routine screening for endometrial cancer has not been recommended by the ASRM and the ISHRAE. As far as ovarian and breast cancer is concerned, there is contradictory evidence, and so currently ISHRAE and ASRM consensus statement does not recommend routine screening strategy or clinical care to detect ovarian or breast cancer in women with PCOS. As far as obstructive sleep apnea is concerned, screening should not be considered with the idea of improving the cardiometabolic risk, But a simple questionnaire like the Berlin questionnaire can be applied to these women, and if positive, they can be referred to a specialist. But a positive screen does not actually quantify a burden, a symptom burden, and does not by itself justify a treatment. So it will depend on how much the patient is affected, and this should not equalize to a cardiometabolic risk for this woman. But the less studied ones are the prevalence of NAFLD, that is a non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, the mood and psychological disorders and the eating disorders, and the effect on self-esteem and image. And these are things that actually need to be addressed through large longitudinal studies. So finally, to summarize, what do we actually need to work up in women in the midlife is the cardiometabolic risk assessment, which should definitely include a BP and a BMI 6 to 12 monthly, a fasting lipid profile and a GTT. If normal, rescreen every 2 years or frequently if additional risk factors have been seen. Impaired GTT workup for patients for type 2 diabetes, a TVS with ET and have a low threshold to perform endometrial biopsy in higher risk group, and counseling about sleep apnea and mood disturbances. The therapy as far as PCOS in midlife is concerned, it's a multidisciplinary approach. Actually, the aim should be to manage the hidden metabolic abnormalities, control risk factors for developing type 2 diabetes and CVD, prevent endometrial hyperplasia and malignancy, and provide a holistic care to tackle the psychological effects. The lifestyle therapy, as we all know, remains the hallmark of treatment. Exercise and behavioral intervention should definitely form part of our counseling. And pharmacotherapy, unlike the N number of drugs that are available, starting from herbal to non-herbal to Ayurvedic products, most of the studies are not giving any recommendation on its routine use, and the use of pharmacotherapy should be limited to metabolic problem in consultation with a specialist. But as gynecologists, what we should always remember is we should keep a low threshold for treating endometrial hyperplasia in women, in PCOS women. So to conclude, PCOS continues to remain a gynecological curiosity and a Pandora's box. Diagnosis of PCOS in midlife can be difficult since the clinical and biochemical manifestations change with age. The metabolic consequences of PCOS oversees the gynecological ones in the midlife. Efforts to create awareness and screen for the same should become an essential part of the care of PCOS women, and challenges in managing PCOS women in midlife is evolving, and further research will provide with greater insight into the same. Before I conclude, I would like to take you through a beautiful quote that I found: from a willowy body to a plump, from a cheerful extrovert to a stressed out, depressed introvert, from a beautiful scarless face to a hairy, ugly one, she lost her smile, she lost her confidence, she lost herself. What happened to her? Everybody wondered, while the cysts on her ovaries had the wicked laugh. And I think this actually concludes what the PCOS women feel like. And as clinicians, hope we will continue learning about PCOS and evolve better methodologies so that we'll be able to give them a holistic and a complete care, starting from adolescence to definitely midlife should form an important part of the essential care of the PCOS women. Thank you. Thanks for a patient hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Elizabeth. It was an excellent presentation touching all the aspects of PCOS in midlife. The questions will be answered. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
I think we'll share the questions after the second talk. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Sibimol, we can introduce